You wait for a friend when he comes, you wait for a friend when he goes. In middle November 1954, I waited. His name was Lee Thomas. How do you keep a light from going out? How do you hold in your own ears the sound of another man's heart? By remembering. His father and mother were juvenile leads in a third-rate stock company. She pretended he was Barrymore. He pretended she was Sarah Bernhardt. The boy sat and read and waited for them to stop pretending. They went from one town to another town to still another town, wearing the costumes of royalty, but paying their rent by the day. And then, in the springtime of their make-believe, they died. You can sleep in corners, you can own nothing, you can go from city to city and stay in a place not more than a day, but so long as you're not alone, it isn't so bad. The worst thing is to be alone. He went upon the road of the lonely, the unattached boys, the drifting young men, the wanderers, the large company of those who seek and never find. The unskilled can always count on the endless dishes and the endless eating places. He broke away from it at times. He scrubbed tallow pots in a stockyard and he tried to write stories. He bought a guitar in a pawn shop and sang for bread. He did this and that. There were always dishes again.
I'm down in the kitchen on my knees, Lord, Lord, and I ain't gonna be treated this way.
Cheap porcelain monuments to the 10-cent blue plate. But the mark of his character was something else. The free public libraries of America. The towns were much the same, but the books were different. One day, he picked up a telephone. She was the telephone operator. He liked her voice.
I met her in the springtime.
Years later, after his daughter was born and grown and a nuisance around the house, they asked, "What's happening to the new generation?" But they belonged to their generation, and he married her because he liked her voice on the telephone. He worked 12 and 14 hours a day, and when he was lucky, he earned 35 cents an hour. Evenings, when she wanted conversation, he was silent with his books. She respected his silence and made no complaint. There is something which silence cannot cover: to have no skill at anything. To do a little of this and a little of that, to sail off in all directions, to be nothing. It was a humiliation. On a Sunday morning, he saw an idle machine shop, and it came to him that here, in a place like this, he could shape himself. To learn to use a lathe, to work a piece of metal, to plane it down. To be able, when someone would ask his occupation, to answer, "I'm a machinist." The hand does this, but the hand is always told by the mind. This is what skill is: knowledge, technique, aspiration. And in acquiring a skill, Lee Thomas satisfied a hunger, the need to know that what you do is useful, that you yourself are important. He had no money in the bank, but his skill was his capital, and no one could ever take it away from him. No one, that is, except the plant manager or the shop foreman. Not that they were bad people, but when a worker asked for a little more in his pay envelope, sometimes it irritated them. A lesson for Lee Thomas. They talked, the talk of mechanics, the workbench, lathes and drills, the whims of the foreman. Some quoted Eugene Debs. Some quoted St. Matthew. But it came down to the same thing. The laborer is worthy of his hire. And then wistfully they spoke of their own lives, their women folk, their children. And listening to them, Lee Thomas discovered that he was not alone, that he was one of the brotherhood of those who labor, yet who require from life something more than bread. Some sign an application, buy a dues stamp, and that's the end of it. He joined the International Association of Machinists in Kenosha, Wisconsin. All good men need something to serve larger than themselves. He had found it. They went back to the shop, not as individuals, but as a union.
Banners waving high, reinforcements now appearing.
Strike is women and children going hungry. A strike is a man on a picket line. A strike is waste. And yet there are times when there is no choice but to strike, and no future except to win. Victory is not the extra dollar, although this is good. Nor is it the reduction of hours, although this too is good. What is very good is the power of brotherhood. The union local was called a lodge. A machinist looked your way and said, "Brother." There was a lump in your throat, and your own happiness now seemed a selfish thing. Out there, beyond the lodge, were machinist and non-union shops. And you discovered in yourself a vocation to go to them, to organize them, to bring them into the brotherhood. No one asked you. You weren't doing it for wages. You did it because a boy had once washed dishes and had been alone. He mimeographed his own leaflets and stood outside non-union shops to hand them out. Or he would get work in a non-union shop and speak to the men during lunch hour. He spoke softly, yet even so, sometimes he was overheard by the wrong people. He was lucky. He had a sixth sense that saved him from the reproaches of anti-union employers. But there were fellow organizers who were less fortunate. The question was it really worth it? For when a man was off somewhere organizing, his wife and children were alone. The week his little boy took sick, Lee Thomas was away. When his little boy died, Lee Thomas was still away. When the price of building the American labor movement is measured, this is a cost that has to be considered. And then the Depression came. There's a great divide which separates the American generations, those who remember the Depression and those who do not.
Takes a worried man to sing a worried song. I'm worried now, but I won't be worried long. I went across the river and I laid down to sleep. I went across the river and I laid down to sleep. When I woke up, there were shackles on my feet. It takes a worried man to sing a worried song. It takes a worried man to sing a worried song. I'm worried now, but I won't be worried long. I asked that judge, hey, what's gonna be my fine? I asked that judge, hey, what's gonna be my fine? 21 years.
Like everyone else, machinists had no work. And what was the good of organizing an empty shop? So you did whatever you could. He opened a lunchroom.
Sing a worried song. I'm worried now, but I won't be worried long.
A man came in and ordered a hamburger. When he paid his nickel, Lee Thomas's little girl ran with it to the meat market to buy a hamburger for the next customer. Sometimes the customer had to wait, but all around it was a losing proposition.
Takes a worried man to sing a worried song. Takes a worried man to sing a worried song. I'm worried now.
If the customer was a machinist, you didn't think twice. But even if he wasn't a machinist, he was still hungry. Well, it wasn't much of a business, but it gave a man something to do, like washing a dish. When the smoke came out of the chimneys, Lee Thomas went back to a lathe. He spent his evenings putting down what he remembered of the Depression. What he wrote was printed here, in this lodge newspaper. He was a washer of dishes, a journeyman machinist, a trade union organizer. Now he was a writer. For the next 10 years of his life, he always found time to write.
Now, but I won't be worried long.
Lodge papers all over began to reprint what he wrote. A machinist who wrote for machinists. Some people come to Washington because they are elected. This is what he was, the elected editor of the Machinist's Monthly Journal. Maybe it wasn't the most important job in town, but it was his job and it suited him. It made him marvel.
We are the fortunate ones in the labor movement because we have the happy condition of being paid to do something that we couldn't help doing.
6 months after he became editor, he began a new feature in the journal, The Old Timer. You got your copy of the journal in the mail. And it got so that the first thing you turned to was the back of the magazine.
I can't see any need at present for burning anyone at the stake because he believes one way or the other. I disagree with the judgment of extremists on both sides, but see no great and present danger because neither, to my way of thinking, makes much sense.
He was friendly, yet somehow he kept to himself. And yet, keeping to himself, he was inseparable from the general membership. And this bond between the machinists and their elected editor produced the unexpected drama of the last year of his life.
The whole Social Security program is totally immoral. Why should benefits be limited only to those who have contributed to the fund? Wouldn't it be more humanitarian if every aged retired worker should get some federal relief payment? Let us end this un-American discrimination against millions of needy aged citizens.
My name is Al Hayes. I'm the international president of the IFM. In the early spring of 1953, Lee Thomas came to my office and told me that the Social Security Reserve Fund was in grave danger. He said that under the guise of morality and humanitarianism, forces were attempting to raid the $18 billion Social Security Trust Fund. At that time, he asked for permission to use the pages of the Machinist Monthly Journal to make a counter-appeal, to set up a counter-lobby. Gentlemen, the next item on the agenda is a request of editor Lee Thomas for permission to use the journal as a part of a campaign to help save our Social Security system. Apparently, developments in that field are quite serious. What do you think of this request, Eric?
In view of the vital stake our membership has in the Social Security system, I strongly favor the use of the journal for the purpose requested.
I'm in agreement with the request made by the editor, and I hope we'll adopt it.
Mr. Chairman, I'm wholeheartedly in accord with the with what General Secretary Treasurer Eric Peterson's views, as our Social Security is of vital interest to the whole country.
I favor the fullest use of our journal, not only to save our Social Security system, but also to improve it.
Well, I take it then that there's general agreement that we ought to grant Lee permission to use the journal for at least one campaign in connection with this general campaign to save Social Security. Is that the consensus?
I agree so, Chairman.
He began a monthly newsletter, and he gave the organization a name, Protect Our Social Security Equity.
Congress is contemplating proposals that will, if passed, break the back of our Social Security system. The lobby that is attacking the Social Security Fund is made up of the same people who 10 years before opposed the whole concept and organization of a Social Security system. The only way the act can be protected is through a national organization of those who have paid and are paying the premiums and have every right to expect the protections promised in the contract.
He asked if machinists and others would be willing to pay 15 cents a month to such a movement. Down at the bottom of the page was a coupon which said, "Yes, count me in." An advertising promotion go, it wasn't a match for Madison Avenue, but it had his signature. The answers began to come in. Some sent ideas. Some sent $1. One wrote, "My husband is dead. I have very little money, so I send you this 6-cent stamp, and I thank you." The letters came in slowly, but they came in by every mail. It was the spring of 1953. He was sick, and there was a day when he knew that while there was a lot of work, there wasn't going to be much time.
All our lives are given for one thing. All the picket lines, the hardship, the hunger, the loneliness, all for this same thing, to have a little security, to be able to go to sleep at night and not to worry what the next day will bring. To leave the job each day without fright, and to come back to the job each morning without fright. To stand at a machine with self-respect. To do a job and not to be frightened.
A voice can be quiet, and yet a voice can be heard. A heart can beat the last pulse of a cycle, and yet make a large sound. It would be false to say that a few newsletters written by a dying man turned the tide against the powerful enemies of Social Security. But the tide did turn, and the newsletters were not entirely without influence. Protect our Social Security equity. Posse. The fight is hardly over. There is the need to raise the amount of benefits. There is the need to add benefits for disabled workers. There is the need to provide pensions for those who are permanently injured. But hands other than Lee Thomas's must turn to this work. His voice is still now, and yet his heart beats, and its sound is heard by the men and women all over America. In the last year of his life, he found strength to wage one last campaign against the specters of his early youth. The poverty and the insecurity that humiliate and rob life of pride and self-respect. This is Lee Thomas. He wasn't what you'd call a handsome man. His ears were too big, and his nose was too big, and his heart was big as well. And it made a big sound. We live in a sophisticated time when people are ashamed to say that a man is good, but we can say it without shame or self-consciousness. The labor movement has had its quota of good men. He was one of them. They will tell you that his heart has stopped. But I tell you, listen.